We hope everyone is enjoying your summer. I know it's been very busy for the 21st Century team here at the state level, as I'm sure it's been extremely busy for all of you with your students this summer. And we're hoping that everyone is winding down summer programming and that everybody is going to have a little opportunity to get a little bit of rest and relaxation before your school year starts back up. But we do want to thank Intact for providing our PD for the month of August, and we're not going to take any more of their time. Just want to make sure that everyone is aware that this recording will go out on the listserv. We are really trying to get those credentials assigned to someone else. So hopefully we will have that back on track for this Friday, and you should receive that in your inbox. If not, we will definitely make sure that this is sent out by your program administrators to your emails.
So she understood that there's a issue with the listservs?
Ma'am? Oh, I thought someone had a question. I'm sorry. Okay. All right. So we will go ahead and turn it over to Yana and her team.
Thank you so much, Susan. And it's funny because this morning we were chatting with Ashton and she said, since it was sent out so late, she hoped at least a few people would make it to the meeting. And I said, no, I know the North Carolina team. You guys are always so on top of it. So it's great to see so many of you here today. Today we're going to be talking about everybody's favorite topic, which is monitoring. And I think one thing that all of us know, or hopefully know, is that fiscal monitoring shouldn't be a surprise. We know that that's something that has to happen regularly. So we're going to today talk about systems and documentation strategies to make sure that fiscal monitoring happens as efficiently and smoothly as possible for your sites. We're going to talk about some of those 21st CCLC specific expectations. And we're going to talk a lot about how having clear policies, written procedures, and organized records will help your programs prepare for monitoring, reduce risk of any kinds of conflict with your grant, and respond when any questions come in from your state leadership. And we hope that you will leave this webinar with a stronger understanding of what strategies and what materials need to be in place for a successful monitoring experience. And we're going to be talking about, and hopefully you will all be sharing about what strategies work, and we can problem solve and think through ways to improve our strategies and improve our systems. So we are here from NTAC. NTAC is a partnership between the U.S. Department of Education, Synergy Enterprises, and Foundations, Inc. As you all know, our role is to provide technical assistance, coaching, materials, and support to state leaders, programs, to help you help children to maximize the quality of your programs. My name is Yana List. I have been a presenter with you all many times. I've visited in person, and of course, we've done many of these webinars. I come from a background as a school day, after school summer educator, and project leader, and I'm joined by my colleague, Andrew Francis.
Hey, Yana, good morning, everyone. Good to be here with you once more. It was a pleasure joining you last month for the first session in this series. And happy to be sharing with you from my own experience working in after school, but also in education policy and youth development generally. And looking forward to just, learn from you, but also share as we talk about, monitoring, especially as one who, has worked as an evaluator and collaborated with Jan and so many others on that as well. Thank you.
Great. So everyone, our objectives for today are to identify the 7 fiscal monitoring areas, to determine systems that need to be ready early, and to apply a readiness lens to assess gaps. We're not expecting you, and your state leaders certainly don't expect you to memorize any of the laws, but it's really about making sure that your systems are in place and you understand what evidence you need in order to be ready for monitoring. And we're hopeful that with this preparation and thinking ahead, monitoring will feel much more manageable rather than reactive and stressful. And so, with that in mind, we want to have a mindset from monitoring being something that we just have to get through and maybe a waste of time or stressful or just a mountain of paperwork, to really thinking about it as an opportunity to protect your investment, and protect the government's investment too. We want to make sure that we are creating and maintaining really high quality programs. And so monitoring is opportunity to check in on how our programs are going. Are we actually being successful in delivering these high quality programs? And we will really use monitoring for ourselves and in that conversation with your state leaders to make sure that your program is healthy, meeting expectations, and delivering high quality experiences to your children. And we want to think about monitoring as an opportunity for continuous improvement. So we are always thinking about what is our program doing well and what are areas for growth, what are things we want to continue to work on. And so we're going to really be thinking about that throughout today's webinar of how can we use the information that we're gathering, information that comes out of our monitoring experience to then improve the quality of our program. So just so we kind of get a good temperature check on everyone as we are getting started today, we have a tool, it's called Slido, and you can go to the website and enter the code or just click the QR code. And let us know if a state monitor asked to see your written procurement policy right now, how would you feel? Do you feel like you are completely ready? You're completely confident? Are you freaked out? Are you feeling pretty good about it? And you're maybe you're not really sure. You're kind of like, I haven't checked recently. So it's a good time for a check-in. Give you guys another minute or two to put in your answers. All right, let's say 10 more seconds and then we'll do some discussion. All right, so it looks like based on our answers, a lot of you feel like you're mostly ready, about a little less than half. And there are people who are feeling pretty confident, pretty good about it, and a good bit of you who are a little bit unsure. So it looks like, not a lot of anxiety, which is excellent. You all feel like you have got this, and that kind of self-efficacy is going to be really valuable. Lower the stress level, and make sure again that this is an opportunity for discussion and for learning rather than like the most stressful part of your job. So thank you all for sharing. We would love to hear from you in the chat box. If you have anything that you're particularly confident about, or for those of you, especially if you've mentioned that you feel mostly ready or feel unsure, if there are specific questions you can pop those in the chat box. We will try to review them, and I know your state leadership are also doing a great job keeping track of what's going on in the chat box. So if there's specific comments they want to make, of course, they can always unmute themselves and share that. So if you're thinking, I'm mostly ready or I'm not really sure, if you have a specific question, do feel free to share that. What are some gaps that you might have? What are some questions? Hopefully we'll answer at least some of them. And again, we can always circle back. So thank you everyone for your participation. So to start off, we want to talk a little bit about standard operating procedures. So in other words, what do we need to write down? What do we need to have prepped because we know this year gets busy, and right now a lot of us have a little bit of breathing room to do some thinking about planning, recording those standard operating procedures. That's going to be really necessary and really helpful because both for you to keep track of your implementation, make sure you're staying on top of your fiscal monitoring, your data, all of those pieces, but also sometimes people leave their positions or you have to take medical leave or you're on vacation. All of those things can happen. And we want to make sure that if somebody needs to take over fiscal monitoring for a period of time, they know what they're doing. They're not kind of sorting through papers, trying to figure out what the expectations are. And it's going to be helpful for you if you are running a program, you're very busy all year, and all of a sudden it's monitoring time. Again, you don't want to be sorting through piles of paperwork wondering where everything is. And really, what we're focused on is that written procedures provide reasonable assurance, which is a system that makes compliance likely, repeatable, and reviewable. So we want to make sure as much as possible that we are ready for monitoring. It's not a shock. It's not the first time you've seen all this paperwork. You are ready to go. You are ready to really implement that high quality, the smoothness, I'll say, of the monitoring system without any kind of additional stress. And so when we have those really strong systems, that is the case where we are ready. We really understand what are our allowable costs, where are our controlled funds, how are we going to be spending things? Are we documenting all of our transactions? Can we provide all that information to our leadership? And we have consistent staff steps. So who is going to be responsible for every part of the prep and every part of the implementation of that monitoring when you're working with and in conversation with your site leadership. So today we're going to be kind of framing this around a little bit of a game, your must-have policy scavenger hunt. And really, we want to make sure that for our programs, we have, at the touch of a couple of buttons, or in some file folders. Some of us prefer handwritten, or maybe you're doing a mix and making sure you upload all your documentation to your file folders, wherever you store that information. We want to make sure we are always tracking the allowability of costs, making sure we're not spending funds we can't be spending. We're tracking procurement. We're tracking any kinds of conflict of interest. And we're tracking any kind of travel. And we'll be talking a little bit more about each of those pieces in just a couple of minutes. And so for every piece of information, you want to do a quick check. So first of all, locate it. Do you know what, off the top of your head, do you know where all of this information is kept? Whether it's in file folders or it's in storage somewhere in your computer. Is it current? So are you keeping all of this information updated? And who is the owner? Who is primarily responsible? Hopefully, if you're the site coordinator or project director, you're able to share these responsibilities with other relevant staff. So you're not trying to do everything on your own. So who is going to be responsible for the pieces of paperwork and tracking so that you are ready when monitoring comes around? So with that, we have another little Slido activity. And for this Slido activity, so which of these 4 policy areas, remember we're talking about fiscal policy, feel the strongest, and which area do you think needs the most? Are you super comfortable with allowability of cost, procurement, conflict of interest, travel, or do you not feel super confident about any of those? One of them, please do share that. Again, you can click on the QR code, or you can go to the website, slido.com, and enter that code, 405-7356. So whichever way you prefer, I'll give you guys a minute to respond to this question. Which of those 4 areas feel the strongest, and which do you think needs the most work for you? You can answer that by going to the Slido site. Take another like 30 seconds or so. Please continue adding your comments. So it looks like allowability of cost seems pretty confident for a lot of us. A few of us have said conflicts of interest is your strongest area. I see a few of you have said that your knowledge of improvement or procurement, excuse me, needs some work. There was a great comment I want to highlight for somebody who said all are in good shape, but procurement usually requires more diligence to document in real time. Yes, that's kind of that piece of keeping it updated in the middle of our busy year. Tracking those can get a little tricky. We have to track, every dollar spent, all of those pieces. So thank you everyone for sharing. And so thinking about some of these fiscal policies is really going to help us kind of focus today. Whatever is the strongest for you, that is something to double check that your knowledge and is aligned with kind of this documentation, what we've confirmed with your state leadership. And if you're not confident, then that can be an opportunity to check in and make some updates to your policies if needed. And Krista mentions needing to focus a little bit more on conflict of interest as an example. So we have all of these. We're going to touch on all of them today. So thank you, everyone, for participating in the chat. And now we are ready to talk a little bit about policies and procedures. So, with our policies and procedures, policies are the rules, what the organization, what the state requires you to be doing. For example, your organization might have a policy that purchases have to be charged to the grant, and they must be allowable, reasonable, allocable, and properly documented. That might be your organization's policy, which is an excellent policy. The procedure is about how you're going to carry out that policy, the routines you have to follow. The elements you have to think about with a procedure is who is going to actually do the procurement or do the fiscal monitoring, whatever it is. How is it going to be tracked? So, is there a form you have to fill out? Is there some place where you have to track your receipts? And where the evidence is stored. So, are you going to be storing things digitally, physically? Um, and really think about and always be able to re-access that documentation. Again, that's going to be important for your organization and important when it comes to monitoring. Um, does everyone who is involved in any kind of fiscal element of your program know how to follow the appropriate procedures? Does everybody know the responsibilities, their own responsibilities, I should say? Does everybody know how to code all your purchases? When we are preparing for monitoring, the procedure is often what helps your program show that the policy isn't just written, it's actually carried out. So saying, this is our policy, this is the procedure, and here's the evidence of how I followed that procedure. I think as many of us know with 21st century, we just document everything. It's really important to make sure that we have that record of everything we're doing, how we're doing it, the outcomes, all of those pieces. Andrew is going to, for a second, flip back to that Slido poll. And we have really talked about, in this poll, you talked about what you were most confident in, what you were maybe the most unsure about, or you think you need some more work on. And I saw for a few of us, procurement came up. So let's do this kind of test that we just highlighted of who does it, how is it tracked, where is the evidence stored. So for someone who feels really confident with procurement, how can you share your procedure? Who does procurement? How are you tracking it? And where is the evidence stored? You can choose to unmute yourself or you can pop it in the chat box. Let us know how your organization or how your program carries out that procurement process, follows the procedure, and if making sure that aligns with our organization's policies. So if anybody wants to unmute yourself, please feel free to do so to share with us how you are taking care of procurement. Who does it? How's it tracked? Where's the evidence stored? If you prefer, you can always pop it in the chat box. I'll give you all a moment to think about it. And anyone, when you're ready to share, please do so. And remember, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, or if you prefer, please pop it in the chat box. Andrew, while we're waiting for some answers to pop in, do you want to share an example from when you were a project leader of how you did monitor or prepared for monitoring or through procurement of making sure that things were assigned, tracked, and stored, evidence was stored?
Sure. So thank you, Yana. So I run like two systems. One, a written documented system in a binder, essentially. Keeping procedures and policies in one, but also tracking and keeping like procurement related files in another. And that was dependent on what the policies were. So in some cases, some contracts required or based on the monitor figure required that we had three quotations or quotes from suppliers. So that was all together, and then just tracking the process from beginning to end in terms of the beginning. If we were in a situation where we had to request for a quote, first of all, that letter or documentation, and then when those are received, not just the actual quotes themselves, but if there's a time factor, ensuring that those emails, with when those were submitted electronically, that was also saved or printed, and then down to the point of a decision being made, right down to award and any accompanying documentation in relation to payments. That was both done in a binder as a or as in a file or in files, and then also electronically as well. Yep.
Thank you for sharing that example, Andrew. And again, that careful monitoring comes up a lot because we always want to be able to provide that evidence to the state monitor, to our organization's leadership, so we're doing that effectively. Angie shared, we have step-by-step written policies that handle how procurement is handled. So it sounds like you have policies and procedures. All purchases are made by the fiscal agent and director and distributed to sites. Site coordinators communicate site needs to the fiscal agent and director. We review to make sure that they're necessary, allowable, and reasonable for each purchase decision, excuse me. So it sounds like, Angie, your organization has found success in really centralizing the procurement strategy to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And by having that really managed from the leadership perspective, you have that opportunity to make sure that all of the costs are reasonable, allowable, and making sure that we are making those kind of prudent decisions, or your site coordinators are making those prudent decisions. And so everybody's on the same page, and kind of centralizing that can be a great strategy that works for a lot of organizations. So different site coordinators aren't making all sorts of different purchases and then asking for reimbursement. And some of those things then aren't eligible, and you're kind of left in a bind. So thank you for sharing that. If anyone else has ideas to share, Krista says that we do ours the same as Angie, and they also track it in a document in Google Drive. So that helps keep up with budgeting. And the data manager helps a lot with that. That's a great point of, in addition to monitoring all the individual purchases, we also have to think about, are we staying on budget? Are we actually, spending the right amount of money? So maintaining a spreadsheet in Google Drive is a great way, because that can be a really good tool for sharing. So all of the relevant parties can access it and track how much money is being spent and on what. Susan shared the procedure of step 1 is making a request for a purchase, and also requiring those 3 quotes, and sending that to the VP of Programs and Impact, who then submits it to the Executive VP and CEO for approval. The Executive VP then makes the purchase and provides the financial administrator with a purchase receipt, and the financial administrator records it in QBooks and stores invoices and receipts in a locked file cabinet. So that sounds like a very clear procedure laid out of how procurement is handled. It's approved from that higher level to make sure, again, it's allowable, allocable, reasonable, fits all of those expectations for our spending. And keeping all those receipts in that physical form, because you never know when you're going to need that. If your fiscal monitor has additional questions, all of those pieces. So thank you everyone for sharing those ideas. And we have really kind of started talking. Oh, mm, I do want to just highlight Natalie's answer before I switch it over to Andrew. Natalie shared that they make sure that all of their purchases are approved prior to making the purchase and then verifying prior to submitting for reimbursement. So it sounds like having that double check for all of your expenditures to make sure you're actually spending money you have in ways that are appropriate and again going to align with the goals of our organization, to make sure that we are using those funds prudently. So thank you everyone for sharing. Again, if you have other ideas, feel free to pop them in the chat box or unmute yourself. We are always happy to kind of return to those discussions. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew, who is going to be talking about the 7 areas of focus, and analyzing how we are spending those funds. So Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, Yana, for kicking us off. And as Yana said, we're going to move now into North Carolina's 7 fiscal monitoring areas for 21st CCLC fiscal monitoring. And as many of you may be familiarizing yourself with the FY26 guidance from NCPDI, which really states that fiscal monitoring reviews use this instrument with the 7 compliance strands, which I'll quickly show you, but also we'll go through that in a little more detail as we go through the rest of the session. But I want to make it clear that this section of the session is not intended to be a full review of every fiscal rule at all. That will take us forever. As many of you are already aware because you have spent the time, to go through those rules, using previous fiscal guidance documents, but also just as you familiarize yourself with the grant and the requirements. But instead, what we want to do today is to just use the 7 areas as an evidence map, a map that we can use to determine, where is the evidence, what is the evidence essentially, what does it support, what area is, is the evidence aligned with. And so as you're doing that, you want to ask yourself, what would a monitor expect to see in relation to this focus area, right? What evidence are they expecting to see? And when they take a look at that evidence, what would the documentation show? And as they're also reflecting on that, where might a red flag appear, as they're going through and they're making those checks. And so the idea here, as we reflect on these 7 focus areas and the related evidence, is we are we're basically placing some emphasis on the fact that internal controls and policies are the foundations of operational integrity. We hold that true as we implement these programs and as we look at the investments that we are placed as stewards over, and as we're ensuring that we're being responsible with that. But in addition to having those operational controls in place, the systems need to be in place in order for the evidence to be visible. And this is so important to me because as I work as an evaluator looking at other pieces of evidence, there's always a question I ask, and Yana and we talk about this a lot in terms of is there fidelity, is there faithfulness in implementing the policies, procedures as outlined essentially, and does the evidence essentially show that as well. And so here are the 7 compliance strands used in North Carolina's fiscal monitoring review process, right? And you can see, starts first with the financial management system, looks at the written fiscal policies and procedures, subcontractors and procurement standards is also addressed, compensation, budget, inventory, and equipment management, but also expenditure testing. And you would agree with us that this list really gives us a sense of a structure as to how we organize the evidence. So things are all over the place. You have these 7 monitoring areas. You have these 7 buckets, if you may. You have these 7 folders, if you may, and then there are subfolders thereafter. And so as a program, you do not have to wait until you hear, oh, the monitor is coming. It's monitoring time. When that notice arrives about monitoring, for you to begin to think about these areas. But instead, you can you can start preparing yourself. Readiness begins right at the start of the program year or before, because you can organize your documentation in these 7 areas. And so as we move through the 7 areas, I'd like for you to really think about, where is your program already strong? Is it in establishing a fiscal management system, right? Or is it when it comes to compensation? But also, where are some areas that you may need to strengthen, whether, having stronger written procedures in place, or, ensuring that the documentation is easy to find. Many times where the programs generally talk about documentation, and people are sifting through lots of paperwork, binders and binders and binders, trying to find, or even just files on their computer systems to determine which is documentation that supports this particular area of interest. And so perhaps that's something you can think about as we go through. Do I need to strengthen the procedures in relation to this monitoring area, or do I need to ensure that the documentation is easy to find, as I'm organizing the information, the documents for a monitor, but also for my own use as well, as I am being a steward over the investment that has been placed in my charge. And so when we talk about areas 1 to 2, the first 2 areas, we're really talking about the fiscal management system, first of all. That's number 1. And when we look at the NCPDI FY26 guidance, it states that each subcontractor's financial management system must provide for identification of the federal award and the associated expenditures, control and accountability over grant, cash, and property, but also adequate safeguards for assets. What does this really mean? It means that it should be easily identifiable in terms of, can the records show that this is the award, right? But here are the related expenses to this award, right? Here are the approvals, and here's a documentation that supports the entire process in relation to that. From beginning to end, there is a system for management of those resources, and that is clearly aligned to the fiscal award that those expenditures are related to. The cash, the property, the safeguard of the assets, all of those are in place. And you'll agree that that system is also supported by having written fiscal policies and procedures, right? And if you reflect on what Yana went through earlier, as we were doing that scavenger hunt, the fiscal policies, in fact, let me emphasize written fiscal policies and procedures, because if I ask you, say, yeah, we have a policy in place, we have some policies in place, but are they written? Are they documented, right? The scavenger hunt helped us to think about that some more. And as we think about written policies and the question is not only whether as an organization you have policies in place, but the question also is, can your staff explain the rule? But can they also explain the routine? Because procedures mean that they're able to explain, but it becomes second nature for them. You understand? It becomes a part of their rhyme and reason. It becomes a part of what they do each and every day. And so with that in mind, written procedures should address, a broad set of fiscal areas, including, the accounting policies that you're abiding by, financial management, the federal payment, allowability, which some of you have been talking a lot about in the chat as we've been going through the session today. We talk thinking about whether the policies or the procedures also cover equipment management of the equipment that has been purchased with grant funds, but also conflict of interest. Also, some of you mentioned that's an area you're strong in, essentially, right? But also the procedures should focus on procurement, procurement of personnel, resources, equipment, etc. Competition, compensation, fringe benefits, travel, participant support costs, record conversion, quality control, mandatory disclosures that ought to be made, there's transparency and accountability, but also protections for whistleblowers as well. And so together, when you think about these areas that should be covered within your written policies and procedures, we're really asking whether the program has a fiscal system in place, but also, is that system clear? Is the system documented, and is it ready to be reviewed? At any point in time, a monitor or anyone else who has an interest, who has a stake, who has a responsibility where the program is concerned, they're able to review this clear, documented, fiscal system, and that's because it is written and it has been included in the policies and procedures outlined for the program. Now, the third area of monitoring has to do with subcontractors and procurement standards, right? And for this area, the evidence should really show that the program followed the required procurement process. And that's why it's important that these procedures are documented, that these processes are documented, because then when you take a look now, where it pertains to area 3, was the procurement process followed, right? As you go about selecting a responsible contractor. Is there a maintenance of documentation that supports the decision that has been made? And we've been talking a lot about clarity this morning. And so not only should procedures and policies and the system itself be clear, but contracts should also be clear enough that staff can compare the invoice to the approved work. You should be able to say, here are the terms of reference. This is the scope of work that was developed in relation to this particular contract. And then when the work is done and invoices are submitted, you can also be able to, compare that and see where the approval of this work aligns with what was the intent for this particular contract. And so with that in mind, a strong contract should help you to answer, who is the vendor? That name should be clearly outlined, right? What service is being provided by that vendor? What is the contract period, the start and end date, if such, or is just a single date for the provision of those services? What deliverables were expected? I talked about the scope of work before. What are those very clear deliverables as to what they will deliver, those tangible products and services that you can really see as evidence? But also, what amount was approved for the contract, and who reviewed the performance of that contractor before payment was issued? That's important, that you can there's a stamp of approval that yes, the work was done, the service was offered at the quality levels expected, and as such, based on that assessment or that review of performance, payment can now be made. And so the practical readiness question, when we think about area 3, which has to do with procurement and subcontractors, is if someone opened this vendor's file, could they understand why the vendor was selected? Would they be able to clearly identify what this vendor was supposed to do and how this invoice was reviewed before payment is issued? And so when we talk about procurement and subcontractors, it is important that we also remember that any goods and services over the $10,000 threshold must have 3 bids. And that's because that's a proof of there being an open market competition. So once it's over $10,000, that threshold, we must have 3 bids as a proof of open market competition for any goods and services over that threshold amount. And so as you are, including those 3 bids, you're also including the reason for your selection and demonstrating that a fair process was administered in selecting this particular vendor or service provider. So again, as you're checking your documentation, you're asking yourself, why did we select this vendor? What were they hired for? And how was the invoice reviewed for them as well? As we move on to area 4, we're talking about compensation. And here I'm sure many of us are very familiar with, because staff have to be paid, right? And so, but as we reflect on, the documentation readiness for that, and generally think about compensation as a key area of focus within our policy procedures and within our fiscal system. For staff who are paid with 24 CCLC funds, we I think the slide, something happened there. Hold on. You're only seeing my screen. Give me a moment. Let me just make sure you're able to see the PowerPoint clearly. One moment. Sorry about that. Let me make sure that I get the slides up for you first of all before we press on any further. My apologies about that. I know my slide just stopped at that moment. I'm not sure. I'm going to get that up for you and continue talking about compensation a little bit more as the fourth area. All right, here we go.
Andrew, does it seem like a couple of the slides have disappeared for some reason?
I think so.
I don't understand.
I think so. So sorry, folks. Just give us a moment. I don't know, for some reason the slides just
What
disappeared
just
from this
happened?
slide deck. So we just try to open another version of the slide deck and pick up where we left off. Bear with us. Our sincere apologies for that.
Oh, I think just open the one from 15 minutes ago.
Yeah. If you have that one open, if you open that one, Yana, you can go right ahead so we don't delay folks too much.
Yeah.
All right.
Let me share my screen. Sorry, everyone. Technical difficulties, everybody's favorite. Everybody see that now?
All right. I think I can see it on my end.
Excellent. And Ashton did a thumbs up.
Okay. All right. Perfect. So sorry about that. As you know, sometimes with the technology stuff happens. So let me pick up. So I was sharing with you about the about compensation as the fourth area of focus. And I was basically sharing with you that, you know, when we think about compensation, we should reflect on the fact that, you know, for 21st CCLC staff, or actually staff paid to 24 CCLC funds, documentation should support the salary or the wage charged to the grant. So we know that in many instances you may have, you know, school staff and staff who are, you know, coming through from different places, etc. But compensation is so important, like every other area within the fiscal you know, policy framework and the guidance you've received from the state. But 21st CCLC paid staff, the documentation should support that their salary or wages charged to the grant. And what that really means is that, you know, time and effort documentation really matters, because what it does, it really helps to show that the payroll charges are accurate, but that those charges are also allowable and that they're also properly allocated as well. And so you want to ask yourself those essential questions as you you know, reflect on the on this particular area of focus, right? The records must account for the 100% of an employee's compensation time, and it should show their effort is distributed between 24 CCLC tasks, but also other duties on an integrated basis. And so with that, we want to ensure that we're complying with the standards of evidence that's required for that, and that requires that you really go through what's provided within documentation within the guidance, right? And that we're not just that the evidence also shows actual work performed. So we're capturing the after the fact, through the daily timesheets, and ensuring that those are also signed off by both the employee and their supervisor, and that we're not just using the initial budget estimates. That's not good enough or sufficient evidence, as part of the documentation for compensation. It must reflect actual work performed and captured after the fact, and that those are adequately also signed by the employee and the supervisor as well. So the fifth area has to do with budget, and the big essential question is, does spending match the approved plan? And with that, what we're really focusing on here is that the spending should align with the approved proposal, and in particular, that alignment should be with the with budget form 208 as well. And so as you're going through, and as you've probably seen before as well in the guidance, so the NCPDI's FY26 guidance states that the 24 CCLC funds must align with the State Board of Education approved grant application, and it must also meet the allowability criteria. That requires that subgrantees, allocate at least 80%, as you can see, of the awarded direct services to students, and then with direct student services not exceeding the 20% of the total award. So 80% direct services to students, and 20% not exceeding that total award. And so the monitoring question that is asked here, which you also want to reflect on as you are preparing, as you're getting ready, but as you're also still on top of your own systems and procedures, is not only whether the money was spent, but can we say that spending matches the approved plan? And does that spending support the program design? We spent a lot of time talking about that earlier on in the first session when we talked about theory of change, theory of action. And as you think about your program goals and your program's design, so here now you are taking that step forward to reflect on, okay, am I spending in line or in alignment with the approved plan, number one? And also, are my expenditures in keeping and in support of my program's design? Because that's going to be key to you accomplishing those goals, those objectives for your program that we spend in relation to how our program has been designed. The sixth monitoring area is inventory and equipment management. And inventory records should show, as you know, what was purchased, where is that piece of equipment located, how is the equipment being used, and also what condition is the equipment in, and if the equipment was moved, if it was lost, if it was damaged or disposed of. All of that needs to be also recorded and included in your documentation, right? So it really answers the question of, am I able to locate this equipment, to identify what use it has been, for what use it has been in operation, and do we have proper records of the items? And you're asking yourself as well, when I asked you to do an inventory check, when I asked you to check to see what's the status of this equipment, and whether what needs to be done with it, whether it needs to be moved, or whether it has been damaged. Is it really in place or is it not? You have to be on top of that. And the seventh and final area is really expenditure testing. And in this area, what we're really saying is that the file should support the expense. And so the practical question you're asking yourself here is, can the documentation show allowability? Is there fidelity, essentially, based on documentation that this was an allowable expense, right? But also, can the documentation show approval? While something may be allowable, was there approval, for that expense to be actioned? Is it properly coded? And we spend a lot of time in the first session going through the codes. Is there a proper receipt in place in relation to that expenditure? Was payment completed? And again, going back to, is that payment, is that expenditure connected to the approved budget? Those are your marching orders for those actions, that there is indeed an approved budget in place. Let me just check the chat to see if any thoughts so far. And whilst doing that, so we want to do a very quick activity, this very quick scenario activity, just to do some analysis of this. I'd like for you to take a look at this documentation through the eyes of a monitor, right? And as you're looking at this mock timesheet, it's not a real program document, just a simple example just designed for us to notice what monitors may ask, as they are going through our documentation. And I'd like for you to use these three questions to the left of the screen as you are reviewing this timesheet. So think about what is missing from this sample employee timesheet. What red flag would a monitor notice as they're going through this timesheet, and what procedure would prevent this issue the next time? So I'm going to give you about a minute or so to review the mock timesheet, and I'd like for you to type in the chat as you reflect on what's missing. Type in the chat one red flag that you're seeing, on this timesheet. So share with us in the chat one red flag that you are spotting. I see Patsy's off the board, and quick fingers here. So I see people sharing that no specificity on Saturday enrichment workshop task. I see signatures. Yes, no signatures on the timesheet. That one is being repeated by a couple folks in the chat. Corrections need initials. You see that there at that line item for the date 5/14/2025. Missing rate of pay, no academic activity on Thursday, no signatures. Absolutely. Account code, yes, very much so. No break on Thursday. One person is also sharing with us in the chat. Absolutely. So as you're going through, you can see that for the most part, some of those red flags include, as many of us said, there's a missing employee signature, there's a missing supervisor signature, right? And no dates are also there. Definitely signifying the approval date for this timesheet. Taking a look as well, the total hours, as one person is also sharing. Some of us may also say that the duties or tasks may sound somewhat vague, and even may not be limited evidence that the time charge connects with 21st CCLC work. I know there are a couple of questions in the chat, and I don't know if the team wants to take those on, or you want to continue and you come back and take them thereafter. I saw about 2 questions so far. One was, if I go back to the top of the chat, is there a 21st century I figure that's some dollar threshold for an item to be considered equipment. And then there's also one about whether monitor compare the job description to paid task on the timesheet. I did see Ashton just responded to that first one. Thank you. Do you want to do it on air as well, Ashton? Go ahead.
Yes, so there's not technically a threshold for what we consider equipment, but there's a threshold for what is considered capitalized equipment, and then all you have to do there is classify it differently on your inventory. But I'll give you guys the definition for 461 and 462 in the chat, so you can look what is technically classified as equipment in that link. And then the other question, would a monitor compare the job description to paid task on the timesheet during a monitoring? If it is something that we have questions about, absolutely. During a fiscal monitoring, we would ask to see your job descriptions to better understand your staff, just the processes, segregation of duties, making sure that there's not a lot of overlap on duties and that there are clear lines of segregation. So yeah, we might compare the job descriptions to your paid tasks to make sure that everything is in alignment with what you said you were going to do.
Hey, this is Katrina, one of the other fiscal monitors. I just wanted to jump in and reiterate what Ashton was saying about I think the question was, is there a 21st century dollar threshold for an item to be considered equipment? So typically we don't put a threshold on there, but you want to think of equipment in terms of something that has a useful life past a year. So oftentimes I think some programs kind of confuse supplies with equipment, but if there's equipment you're purchasing, let's say it's, some fans that you need for summer programming or when the weather is, the temperature's a little warmer, that would be considered equipment. Even though it's not a big cost, it's still considered equipment because it's something that you can use year in and year out. So you want to kind of think in terms of something that has a useful life more past a year of your programming, because we typically do our cohort of 3 years. So if you're going to purchase some equipment, of course you would say furniture and things like that, but there's no particular dollar threshold. But just think of in terms of purchasing equipment to use for students that would be in excess of 1 year of your program. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Do you want to take the second question as well, Ashton, or that one was covered?
Was it the job descriptions, or is there
Yes.
another one?
The job description, that was the one.
Yep. So yep, during monitoring, we would look at job descriptions to make sure that they're kind of in alignment with your timesheets, and then there might be additional questions that come up during the monitoring. So yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing, adding to the conversation here. Absolutely. And it's important as we're going through that, as you know, the colleagues from NCBI have shared, that we focus on those 3 questions: what's missing, what red flag would the monitor notice, but also what procedure would prevent this from happening next time. So as we press on, and pretty much I think you guys were on the ball. You really flagged those key areas that we had in mind as well. And so with that, we're going to just move on to talk briefly about the final section for today's session, which is really on a gap analysis. And so so far we've talked about monitoring readiness, and we really looked at that through 3 lenses, if you may. So we started off by reflecting on the need for some sort of a mindset shift, from surviving an audit to more so protecting the investment that you have been placed as a steward over, right? And then we looked at the policies and procedures that need to be written. As we said, that's very important that they're documented, but ensure that those policies and procedures are current and that they also are usable. And so finally, we spent some time also looking at those 7 fiscal monitoring areas that are addressed in North Carolina's fiscal guidance, and also looked at practical ways that you should be reflecting on the documentation, looking through the eyes of a monitor, essentially yourself, and being ready, not when you get a notice about what's it called, about a monitoring activity taking place, but from the outset as well. And so now we're going to bring that all together, and as we reflect on a gap analysis, it's important that we ask ourselves the question, what can we strengthen before monitoring occurs? And so when we talk about a gap analysis, we're not assuming that something is wrong all the time. We say, oh, let's do a gap analysis. What it really means that we're honestly looking at the difference between what your program currently has and what your program would need to show during some sort of a desk review, a monitoring visit, or a follow-up visit, request. That's important. So you are at the space where you are reflecting into the, okay, when I think about my program currently, right, and what I would need to show as evidence during a desk review, a monitoring visit, or a follow-up request, where do I stand where that is concerned, right? And so the goal is that you are on top of things. You are being proactive in finding those gaps early, and that makes it easy for you to fix. Not at the point at which you are, approached by a monitor, but instead ahead of that. You're still ahead of the game with that. And one practical way that you can do that is to really create this one-stop fiscal archive. And this archive can be digital or it can be physical. I spoke to you about, my when I was a program leader, having both, systems in place, a digital and a physical system. And the idea is that is really what works best for you, but also what's required by the grant as well. And this really helps you to pull things together, all your procedures, your policies, your receipts, your invoices, your purchase approvals, your amendments, your reimbursement files, all that gets into that archive. And while you're pulling that together, it's important for you to think about, your own portfolio at this point in time. And, in the session we did in early July, we asked you to identify your greatest gap. So those are part of your gap analysis. We actually do some sort of assessment of your greatest gap in your current documentation system. And as you can see from the slide here, that the answers vary, across programs, and I'd say there's potentially an even spread. If you go back to that slide, Jan, right, across the 7 areas. But take a moment now and try to recall what was your response during that session, and what is your biggest gap at this point in time? Is it a fiscal management system? Is it the written policies and procedures? Is it the subcontractors and procurement standards? Is it compensation? Is it expenditure testing, which came out at about 19.2%, as you can see there? Or could it be inventory and equipment management? That was at 17%, so second ranked there. Or is it budget? And as you reflect on this, we like to use a lottery test, and I think it's useful in this situation. If the program director or the fiscal manager in your program won the lottery and they left tomorrow, could another authorized person find the documentation needed to respond to a monetary request? That's a question I want you to think about. If they left tomorrow, they won the lottery and left tomorrow, could an authorized person find the documentation needed to respond to a monitoring request? And that question really is not about replacing staff expertise, but instead it's about protecting your program. It's about ensuring that documentation doesn't live in one person's inbox, in one person's memory, in one person's desktop on a folder, or some personal filing system, because that places your program in a very vulnerable situation. I talk about a lot when I ran programs, when I supported program activities, that the institutional memory cannot live with only one, or the program's memory can't live with one person. It has to be systemized. It has to be within a system that's easily accessible by authorized personnel. And essentially, that requires that you have documentation that is shared, that's organized, and that's also consistently maintained. When that's done, you have a program that's prepared for monitoring, but also prepared to demonstrate its effectiveness and its ability to really maintain good documentation of what it's doing. And so as we go into this quick stoplight readiness stoplight activity, I want you to think about your own fiscal evidence. And for each monitoring area that will show you, ask yourself, do we have the policy? Do we have the procedure? Do we have the evidence? And could someone else find it without needing a very long explanation in relation to those policies, procedures, and any piece of evidence required? And so the goal today is not to solve every single gap, no, but the goal is to identify the most useful next step that you and your program can take as you look, to boost up and to ensure that you are prepared for that. So take a look here at the screen, and I'd like for you to reflect on those 7 fiscal monitoring areas that we have discussed throughout the session, right? And use them as a readiness stoplight for you. This is just a self-assessment, and I'd like for you to, this is not for any public compliance review or anything. This is just for you. And there's no expectation that everybody is going to be in the green today. Absolutely not. But for each of these monitoring areas, think about the documentation that you currently have and ask yourself, is the policy written for this area? Is the procedure clear? Is the evidence organized for this area? And could another authorized person really come and find it if there's a monitoring follow-up tomorrow? And I'd like for you to take some time to really rate each area using one of these options. So green means, hey, we're ready. The policy is written, the procedure is clear, the evidence is in the binder or shared documentation system. Yellow, no, we're just in progress, right? We do the work, but the procedure is not fully written down. The evidence is not easy to find, or the system depends too much on one person. That's where you'd be if you're in the yellow. Or if you're in the red, you're like, we're not ready. In fact, I'd say we're not yet ready. It means that you're going to get there, but you're not ready at this point in time. You don't currently have the policy. You don't have the procedure or the evidence in place. Or you're not even sure where you would find that evidence if you were asked to produce that evidence. So reflect on those, and think about what your yellows are today. And I'd like for you to choose one area that you rated yellow and not try to fix everything all at once. As I said, a yellow means that the work may already be happening, but the system is not fully monitoring ready just yet. So identify one yellow area, and then simply identify one move that you can make to turn that area from green to yellow this week. One simple move you can make to turn that area from yellow to green this week. It doesn't have to be anything major or a major overall. It could just be writing down the missing step first of all. It could be moving the evidence, into the binder, into the right place. It could be adding a checklist as part of your process. Your process. It could be assigning an owner. In short, there's a process owner that's clearly identified for this for this action, or just saying, I'm going to do a monthly documentation review to see what we have, what we don't have, and how we can improve that. And I'd like for you to type that simple move in the chat that you're going to make from the yellow area identified. What simple move you're going to use to turn your yellow into a green this week? Let's share that in the chat together. So I see Angie already started sharing with us that we've done a deep dive into our fiscal management this summer. All procedures have been updated to reflect current procedures. The guide is written so that a new fiscal monitor could open the manual and know how to do each activity, each grant-related activity. It would also work if the fiscal monitor was out unexpectedly for a period of time and the fiscal operation still needed to operate. We also reviewed the fiscal management grant guidance update from this summer's meeting with NCDPI, and made sure that we met the expectations in that portion of the grant guidance. So kudos to you and your team. Angie, as some of your colleagues are doing, giving you, a round of applause there for that effort. And we'd like some others to share, what one simple move that you can make that could turn that area from yellow to green this week that you've identified from the 7 areas that we've been discussing this morning. All right, so we got one more here. that I'll share, and then we'll keep moving. So Suzanne is sharing a request for purchase with 3 quotes is provided to the VP. Or is that an old message? I think so. I think my chat went way back to the top. So sorry. Updating and finalizing fiscal policies to reflect newly adopted procedures and our policies, reviewing our procurement process to ensure that it is written with clarity, meets us requirements. Kudos to you, Fansetta, for putting that move, sharing that move with us here. Jessica is sharing, write everything down and make it clear to any that are involved. Communication is key, and I want to work on making that easier. Thank you also for sharing that with us, Jessica. So yeah, so wanna give you guys a thumbs up. Gives you guys a word of applause for that. And as we go towards the end of today's session, just want to say to you that please continue to move through your yellows, right? Continue to move through your yellows. For each yellow that you've identified today, name a specific gap. If you could go to the next slide, Ayana, and ask yourself: is the procedure missing? Right? Is the file clear for for that particular area? Is the evidence hard to find, or just ask yourself, is the procedure happening or not? Or do you have a situation where only one person knows how that process really works? And then spend some time, to assign an owner to that, set a date for you to check back to see what progress you've made in relation to that area. Because really you'll recognize that readiness improves when the next step is specific enough for someone to complete. When it becomes everybody's business, we know that in programs, it doesn't really get done. So tell yourself, by Friday of this week, the fiscal lead will, move all our current vendor contracts into a shared fiscal binder or something, right? Or by next month when we have our team meeting, the program director will draft a reimbursement review checklist. Name the action, name the person, but also put a timeline as to when that action will be completed as you try to move your yellows into greens. And so as you leave here today, everything will not be finished, but the goal is that you leave with one practical move that you can do to reduce your monitoring anxiety, to make documentation easier for you, to make sure that there are systems that you can follow. And so you can build this sense of assurance that you have done all that has been asked of you to protect the investment that has been placed in your charge, and that you can transform monitoring, transform your own mindset about monitoring, and ensure that you are really checking up on the health of your program and its fiscal situation, and you're putting in systems that will work for you and for your program each and every day. So thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that this was helpful for you to begin to think through where you're at and begin to organize your systems and your approaches and your documentation, your evidence, to show your faithfulness in implementing the program within those 7 areas that we have discussed this morning. As we close, you can always feel free to, reach out to us if you have any questions at info@21stCCLC. NTAC.org. You can check out the upcoming events on our website as well. And you can also visit the Knowledge Network on our website. And that's a place where you can, see resources. You can also share your own resources, but you can also ask questions as well of your colleagues and other practitioners in the field. Before you go today, we'd like for you to take a moment just to complete the feedback form. I'm going to place the link to that in the chat for you, so you can tell us how the session went for you today, but also how we can continue to support you and provide these resources and technical assistance that helps you to implement high quality programming. We'll hang on for any questions you may have as well while you're answering completing the poll this morning.